Hello, and welcome to A Great Frontier Odyssey, brought to you by Exhibit Envoy and Pleasanton's Museum on Main. In 1873, Harper's Weekly commissioned an illustrated series bringing the West, newly opened to the United States by the Transcontinental Railroad, to its primarily Eastern readership. Two French immigrants received the coveted job. The first was Jules Tavernier, who was the son of an English confectioner whose shop stood in Paris's left bank. The second was Paul Frenzini, whose father was an exiled Hungarian nobleman, and who had himself served as an officer in the French army when it invaded Mexico in the 1860s. Although Harper's had already published both artists, they had not collaborated before, and so they submitted a pair of drawings as a sort of audition. The first, called Spring, depicted multiple scenes of American life in the reawakening of the season. The second, moodier piece was called The Circus Comes to Town. These two drawings clinched the deal. Frenzini and Tavernier's route crossed the country from the east through the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, all the way to the far west in California, ending in San Francisco. The duo began in New York City in July of 1873, documenting the experience of European immigrants preparing to head west. They then moved on to Pittsburgh, itself once a frontier outpost. The journey starts at a boarding house where emigrants stayed until they could get a train ticket out west. Piling their belongings onto a cart, they then departed for the station and hopefully a new and prosperous life. In Pittsburgh, Tavernier visited and sketched the iron mills that had already made the city's reputation as an industrial center, while Frenzini, whose earlier reporting on coal miners gave him labor connections, met with the secretive and violent activists known as the Molly Maguires. From Pennsylvania, the two correspondents followed the hopeful emigrants' route on the rails through Ohio, Illinois, and Missouri. They depicted days spent sitting or standing in crowded, noisy railroad cars, and hours shivering in the rain while waiting for a new train, after being switched off for more highly valued freight cars. For some, the end of the journey lay here in eastern Kansas, at the beginning of the West as it was then known. These families bought land, built farms and homes, and joined communities such as Parsons, which owed its booming prosperity to its position as a rail hub. But for Frenzini and Tavernier, Parsons was just the first way station. The next leg of the journey westward took our correspondents through Kansas and into Texas and Oklahoma, then called Indian Territory. They recorded the drama of a storm watch at the Army signal station at Fort Gibson, and sketched scenes of Native American life in a land nominally self-governed, but still subject to the U.S. Army's intervention and increasingly pressured by white encroachment. Among the scenes Frenzini and Tavernier reported from Texas, we find a vigilance committee trying, and hanging, accused horse thieves in the Texas borderlands, and the first fruits of the year's cotton harvest in Denison on the northeast Texas border. The world that they saw here and sent back to their readers was a little rougher than the farms of eastern Kansas. Even such normal scenes as a Saturday noontime in a Texas town when the farmers came to shop and gossip, or the bustle of activity in a Kansas real estate office, have a bit of a frontier edge. They spent time among the cowboys of Texas, and their drawings and descriptions of life on the range helped to burnish the cowboy's romantic image as a hero of the West. Frenzini accompanied a group of Texas landowners on a days-long deer hunt through the cross-timber forest of northeastern Texas. The Great Plains leg of Frenzini and Tavernier's journey ran from late August into October. They saw how the sweeping winds of the plains could make wildfires a settler's worst nightmare, and how the sudden success of a railroad town could just as suddenly collapse. With expert guidance from Topeka's Henry Worrell, who was not only an artist and musician, but had also studied ranching in depth, Frenzini and Tavernier compiled a 9-panel spread detailing the high points of the Texas cattle trade. Coming to the end of the hallway, we continue the exhibit in the Phoebe Hearst Gallery. Our heroes planned to reach Denver by the end of autumn, but much remained to be seen on the plains before they braved the Rocky Mountains. Drawings of Texas and Kansas continued to flow eastward to New York, as Frenzini and Tavernier found new subjects. They studied the people known as Arkansas Pilgrims, who migrated back and forth across the border between Texas and Arkansas, briefly farming or finding wage work before packing up to move on once again. On an overflowing Red River, they saw boats ferrying passengers and wagons into and out of Texas. They showed their readers the sudden violence of a prairie windstorm breaking upon travelers, as well as the towns that built their Main Street shops underground until they could construct suitably sturdy buildings. While there, they reported on the bison hunters of the plains and took a side trip on a stagecoach line. Franzeni and Tavernier showed their readers the slaughter of bison herds, with the meat left to rot on the prairie, while the hides and bones were processed for use by industries back east. Following a stage line in southern Colorado, they saw drivers and postmasters exchange mail bags on the run, joined travelers as they ate their morning meals of cornbread, pork, beans, and tea, which they called slumgullion. They saw their driver calling for fresh mules in a voice that could be heard nearly a mile off. And then finally the relief of a home station, where passengers could finally exit their bouncing box of a ride. On November 5th, Franzeni and Tavernier reached the mile-high city of Denver. Mining, especially for precious metals, was Colorado's biggest industry, and to describe it they consulted a local expert, Alfred Matthews, whose first-hand knowledge informed their 9-panel spread depicting the smelting process at a plant near Denver. But mining was not the only item on our correspondent's Colorado agenda. They also depicted the Denver cityscape and the natural beauty of the Rockies. This double-page spread appeared in Harper's Bazaar, alongside an article comparing Colorado's grandeur to that of the Alps. In this drawing, Franzeni and Tavernier show us a pumping station for refilling locomotive boilers. The driver lies on the lever so that his mule is always within easy reach. And here, 2 farmers open the gate to a side channel in one of Colorado's elaborate aqueduct systems. As the spring of 1874 arrived, our correspondents once again ranged out into the mountains to find new subjects for their talents. They followed a company of miners headed toward a newly discovered lode deeper in the mountains, and they joined sportsmen who sought big game in the Rockies. Some trekked into the wilderness for bear, while others contented themselves with shooting at pronghorn antelope from their railroad cars. Before resuming their westward progress, Franzeni and Tavernier made side trips to Arizona and Nebraska, where they focused on the Native Americans of the Southwest and of the Central Great Plains. Before leaving, they reported on white settlers in northern Colorado who had been displaced by native raids the previous winter. In Arizona, ancient pueblos and accounts of southwestern religious tradition inspired this drawing of Hopi villagers watching the sunrise for signs of an ancient hero's return, one of the few works in this series not based on first-hand observation. Tavernier proceeded alone to the Red Cloud Agency in Nebraska, established by the federal government for the Oglala Lakota. After great effort, he gained entry to the sacred Sundance ceremony, and his presence nearly caused a diplomatic incident. Out of respect for Lakota religious sensibilities, we have omitted the print of this ritual. Meanwhile, Franzeni took a head start on the team's final leg, with Tavernier following about a month behind him. They traveled through Utah, crossed Nevada without stopping, and ended their odyssey in San Francisco. Now famous, the pair were welcomed with open arms by the local art community. In the 1870s, Utah was already known as a Mormon refuge, and polygamy a subject of fascination back east. Franzeni and Tavernier obliged with pictures of new sister wives coming to Utah and joining the community. In Ogden, Franzeni saw dispossessed Shoshone begging near the station, with white travelers treating them as curiosities. A month later, possibly also in Ogden, Tavernier depicted a group of Utes trading at a frontier store. Among various San Francisco subjects, Franzeni and Tavernier drew Chinese immigrants fishing in the bay and working in the streets and shops of Chinatown. Like the Mormon and Native American drawings, these pictures catered to the East Coast stereotype of an exotic West. In addition to chronicling Franzeni and Tavernier's journey across the continent, the exhibit gives us a peek into their methods, with these comparisons between their original watercolor sketches and the final published prints. In between, the artists carefully transferred their images, mirrored, in pencil to boxwood blocks, which were carved at the publishers into their final versions. And this concludes our video tour of A Great Frontier Odyssey, Sketching the American West. We hope you'll have an opportunity to visit the exhibit in person. We've left a few surprises for you. If you want to explore this subject further, please check out the book on which the exhibit is based. Chronicling the West for Harper's, Coast to Coast with Franzenier and Tavernier in 1873 and 1874, by Claudine Chalmers, who also curated this show for Exhibit Envoy.